Hey, welcome back, and welcome to the Know Thy Enemy part of the course. I'm going to visit a few concepts from Lean and Agile and a bunch of other places. Now, hopefully you've given me some of the feedback I asked for in the last lesson, and no worries if not, I give you permission to skip around. Either way, I'm going to call this done. So now let's pull our discussion of time theft into the doing column where it will probably stay for the next few lessons. What's good to know about these concepts is that they're somewhere at the intersection of timeless observations about human nature and emerging evidence-based studies on behavioral economics and brain science. The actual Venn diagram probably overlaps a lot more than this, but I'll leave it as is for readability. I first started writing about how these concepts apply to lawyers over 5 years ago, and just for kicks, I'll include this handy poster as a download in this lesson. This is really just a restatement of the 7 wastes of lean, which is kind of a classic concept, except I use the word lawyers there. Clickbait at its finest. But for this lesson, I'm going to borrow from a recent book that I really love, called Making Work Visible by Dominica de Grandis. I'll put a link in the notes for it too. What's funny is that Dominica and I seem to learn some of the same lessons, but from a couple of different companies that were in competition with each other at opposite ends of Seattle. Dominica worked at Corbis with a lot of really great thinkers, while at the same time I was at Getty Images learning from the talented folks there. She has identified 5 time thieves, and I'm going to borrow from her taxonomy, albeit with some adjustments for the legal space. And I like her description of these things as thieves, and they're insidious ones at that. When someone comes in and steals your stuff, it's relatively easy to see what's going on, and you can usually sense that the loss has occurred. But when somebody or something steals your time, okay, really, it's going to be one of these somebodies or these somethings. But you don't really notice time theft while it's happening. It's pretty ephemeral. And that doesn't make it any less real. In fact, time theft is probably more harmful than other types of theft because once a particular chunk of time is gone, it's gone forever. And that is costly. So let's dig in on the first of de Grandis' time thieves, work in progress, or WIP. I'm going to start with the definition of WIP, since those of you with a law firm background may have come across a very limited concept of WIP and you might not know the full scope of the problem. So if you've ever worked in a bigger law firm, or even a smaller firm managed by folks that come from a big law background, you might know this particular definition of WIP. Some folks use it to mean hours that someone has worked but not yet tracked in whatever time and billing tool you use. But more commonly, the term WIP is used to mean hours that people in the firm have worked but not yet billed. Technically, these definitions are true, but they're just a small part of the overall picture. What they get right is that WIP is a form of inventory. In other words, it's a supply of stuff, in this case legal services, in which you've made an investment, your time, but also all the stuff that it takes to keep the lights on at your firm, but you haven't yet realized a benefit. And for any of you who have ever had retail or warehouse jobs, you probably know all about inventory. In order to sell something, you first have to buy something. And when you buy something, you have to put it somewhere. Now, the hope is that your customers will buy your inventory at roughly the same rate you acquire it. But that's a tricky balance to achieve. When things are selling well, you have a tendency to invest in more of it. But if sales slow down, then you're stuck with a bunch of inventory. In lean terminology, inventory is a key player in the focus on waste, largely falling under the overproduction header. Or rather, as I said a minute ago, inventory is a thing in which you've made an investment that doesn't yield a benefit, or at least hasn't yielded one yet, which is the definition of waste. So hold that thought in your head. Inventory is a form of waste. But wait a minute, if you want to sell something, you have to have a thing to sell, right? I mean, that's correct. Inventory is a form of waste, but it's a necessary one. We can't get rid of it entirely, but we can work to minimize it. Which leads to a broader definition of WIP and how it's thought of in the world of lean manufacturing. In lean, WIP is anything that you've started but haven't yet finished. Think for a minute about an assembly line for building bicycles. You've got your delivery dock where the raw materials come in, and then they go to an assembly station of some sort where they're cut and then welded into the proper shape, or probably multiple shapes. And then those parts get put together, and then they get painted, and the components get attached, and eventually you have a finished bike. And that bike goes to the shipping dock where it gets shipped off to the buyer, or maybe a middleman like a distributor. Every place where you have incomplete product is WIP. It's something in which you've made an investment, buying the raw materials, purchasing and running the machines, hiring people to do the work. But where there's unfinished work stacking up, you can physically see that it's a form of inventory. Part finished work that is necessary to the process of building the full bike, but that also represents an investment on which no return is possible until that bike is completely built and someone would actually want to buy it. Okay, so there's a fair bit of investment tied up in partly finished inventory. What's the big deal? If WIP is necessary to build your finished product, why worry about it? Here's why. There's this fascinating relationship between WIP and cycle time known as Little's Law. And what Little's Law says is that your average cycle time, in other words, the total elapsed time it takes to deliver one unit of your product, is the quotient of the average amount of WIP that your system is carrying divided by your system's rate of work. Now note that the amount of work in progress is the numerator. The bigger that number gets, the longer your cycle time will be. One place where you've probably seen that in action is out on the road. The more cars in the lane, the slower the rate at which any single car can move, which means you've got a traffic jam. And your WIP can create a traffic jam in your workflows just the same way. In lean manufacturing, they take advantage of Little's Law by trying to reduce the amount of inventory that piles up between the workstations. Lean thinkers are always moving towards an ideal known as single piece flow. And what's nice about manufacturing is you can literally see when the WIP is stacking up and then do something about it. But with knowledge work, the work itself, including the work in progress, usually lives between our ears or on our devices where it is difficult or impossible to see. But Little's Law still applies, so the number of projects that you or your team are juggling at any given moment will increase the amount of time it takes to deliver any single piece of work. It's a traffic jam. And the reason why has to do with a couple of other cost considerations of WIP. Switching costs and carrying costs. So let's use that juggling metaphor to illustrate. If you have just one ball, you can put all of your focus and attention on that. If the ball is a project, you work on that one project until it is done. Two balls at first would seem to have the amount of attention you can apply to each ball. This is the carrying cost of putting an additional ball in the air. But because true multitasking is impossible, what we're really doing is switching our attention back and forth between the two balls. And the amount of time it takes to make that switch is our switching cost. That means the amount of time you spend on each ball is actually less than half because some of your time gets lost in the changeover. Putting more balls in the air not only means you're spending less time on each ball, you're also spending more time attending to the space between balls. That time you spend switching does nothing to add value for you or for your customer. In other words, that time is pure waste. You're making an investment, but nobody's getting any benefit. And while it's unlikely that we knowledge workers will ever get to elusive single-piece flow, we can try to keep ourselves to a reasonable number of balls in the air at any one time. Which leads to one of the foundational principles of Agile, and especially the Kanban methodology. Start less to finish more. The more you can strive for single-piece flow, also known as monotasking as opposed to multitasking, the less time it will take you to deliver the project you're actually working on. Just like the flow of traffic will speed up if you reduce congestion on the road, the rate at which you finish work will speed up if you have less WIP in your system. Okay, that's it for Time Thief number 1. Up next, I'm going to show you how to use your Kanban board to corral your WIP. And then we're going to talk about handoffs and why they are stealing your time as well. See you soon.